Bounce Back Wisconsin, and Safer at Home edicts. He's declared that the church is an essential business. I applaud this. I'm a Christian. I think the church is important. But I think that his edicts underscore two ideas. The first is, what does he think that the church is essential for? When the church is lumped in with other social service agencies, when it feeds the hungry, when it takes care of children, when it looks after the elderly, when it provides counseling to people seeking jobs, it is basically unrestricted. This is seen as essential activity, things that needs to be done. When it is doing the things that are more directly associated with religious practice, such as funerals and weddings, which are specifically named, and baptisms and christenings and confirmations, which are not named, it is seen as irrelevant. You can do that online. It's not really important that people be together. There's no doubt that there are scriptures that talk about that they went from day to day to each other's house, that we're supposed to lay hands on the sick and see them recover, that we are supposed to greet one another with a holy kiss, or in our society usually that's interpreted as a hug. These are direct commands, but we as Christians understand that it's good. God has given us government to help protect the innocent, and at this point the danger of death is not from foreign invaders or from outlaws, but rather it is from a virus, from a disease. And we applaud the government's desire to encourage social distancing, to encourage the wearing of masks, to encourage any practical thing that would bring about a reduction in the disease. That does not convert into us believing that the things that we do on a spiritual level are not more enduring and more important and more central to the mission of not only the church, but the needs of the human race. So I think that we have a dilemma or a collision that is going to come between these two ideas. But I think that as the church, that we should not get caught up in the collision of these ideas so much as we should step back and think about the ramifications they mean for the church. Number one, people that are not of our theological belief, understanding, and by this I mean historic Orthodox Bible-believing Christians, contrasted with people who may be nominal Christians or who are of some other faith persuasion or who are atheists and non-believers, that there is a great divide about the necessity of the church. We've seen this boiling for a long time, the issues of housing allowance for pastors and for the nonprofit status of churches. The church doesn't do anything to deserve these in the eyes of people that are not already persuaded. So I think the first thing that we can learn as the church is we need to do things that are important. To please God? Yes, our primary goal should be to please God. Jesus went about doing good to all men. Jesus came into the world to serve, not to be served. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. The idea that people are unconverted does not mean that we can't bless them. And that includes the Samaritan woman, the Roman legionnaire, the Samaritan leper. All of these people are people that were touched by Jesus Christ, but weren't even Jewish. They were people that were outside of his faith circle, outside of his family. In our church, we heavily emphasize the fact that your priorities need to be, first of all, you need to be personally responsible, pay your own bills, take care of your own responsibilities, live in a way that you can be a blessing to others. Let him who formerly stole steal no more, but rather let him work with his hands that he in turn might be able to give or bless others. That being said, this hierarchy of taking care of your own needs, your own responsibilities, secondly, those of your family, he who doesn't take care of his family is worse than an infidel. Thirdly, the church, weep with those that weep, rejoice with those that rejoice. If somebody comes to you and says that they have a need, don't say, be fed, be warm, but rather take some practical steps to help deal with that. And then obviously our community. You know, Jesus walked through the streets, the apostles walked through the streets, they saw the blind, they saw lepers, they saw people that were in situations of difficulty, and they reached out and they helped them. That generosity overflowing out of the heart of God is something that we naturally should be doing as Christians. So all of these things can be motivated by our calling, by what it means to be a Christian, that they are really part of what we're supposed to be doing. But there's also a PR angle to it, that when we do these things, we are understood by those that are on the outside as doing something that is important and worthwhile. In one of the first great plagues that the Christians grappled with when Julian was emperor of Rome, he was trying to reestablish paganism. But one of the problems is that Christians during this plague had gone out in the streets and collected the sick and the dead from the pagan families who had cast them out. They were afraid of getting infected, so they'd literally thrown family members and household members into the street, and the Christians came and collected them. The Christians ministered to them. And contrary, as some have said, you know, that if we trust God and we do the right thing, we won't get sick. Many of them did get sick, and many died. But they felt like that they were being Christ to the Christless, that they were being the very hands and feet of God in that situation. And Julian later remarked to a pagan friend that it was very difficult to reestablish paganism because of the popularity that was engendered by Christians who had, at the risk of their own lives, taken care of the sick and taken the dead and given them respectful burial when their own families were unwilling to do that. So number one, I think that we can learn from this pandemic, or more specifically from our government's response to the pandemic, that people that are not of our persuasion or of our beliefs do not see the importance of the church. And the church needs to put itself in a position where it is understood as being important, because it really is. Secondly, they do not see at all the spiritual value of what the church does. That the practices of the church are quaint and kind of like being a member of the Masons or the Rotary or some other club where old white people get together and sing songs. I think that we're lacking a power and a dynamism in the American church. I don't think that we're preaching the gospel in many cases. And by that, I'm not even being critical of the content of the preaching of the gospel. I just think that we spend most of our time sharing with people who already agree with us rather than talking to people that don't. We do not believe that God is miraculously going to intervene. We do not even ask him to do that. We're not praying for the sick. We're not praying for miracles. We're not trusting our finances to God. And so in many ways, it's the same as the divorce statistic among evangelicals, which is almost the mirror image of people that are statistically the same in other regards other than religion in our society. In other words, as many people who are evangelicals get divorced of the same age and life status as people who are not evangelicals. So I say we got to do something different about our spiritual life. And that's not going to happen from the governor. You know, people can say all they want. Let's recall. Let's impeach the government. Let's vote for somebody else next time. Let's try to get legislative changes. Let's try to get them to expand the order so that we can actually meet together. I think that is totally secondary to who we are as the church. If the church is not dynamic and powerful, if it is not doing its job the way that God intended to do its job and be what God intended it to be, then there's no reason for it to be. The rest of it's just rhetoric. The rest of it is just cultural. The rest of it is just existing for the sake of existing. And I'm not telling people to not be politically involved or not to complain about things or say, why does Office Depot have 25 people in it and Walmart has 100 people in it and we can't have church with 9 people in a room? Why is it that restaurants are going to open to service as long as there's social distancing, but churches can't? I think that those are legitimate questions, but I think that they're totally secondary to this. Number one, are we walking in Jesus' steps? Are we servicing the poor and the sick and the needy and the people that have a hole in their heart? And secondly, are we manifesting the spiritual power that comes with being filled with the Holy Spirit and showing forth the gifts of the Spirit and showing forth that we are a supernatural people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, something that is different than just a club of people gathered together? I'd like you to think about these things, because pretty soon the pandemic's going to be over and it's going to be back to business as usual. But these underlying premises that you find in the hearts and the minds of not just our governmental leadership, but the average person on the street in your town is not going to have been changed by it unless the church changes. And I want to challenge you. Be the essential church. Don't just claim the title. Do the actions.